Hi Internet, welcome to the Gred Troyan YouTube channel. Ordinarily on Fridays I do a weekly vlog discussing my adventures in Final Fantasy XIV as a first-time player. But this week we're doing something a little bit different. This week I'm going to be discussing the new Final Fantasy IX crossover in Another Eden, my thoughts on it from both a gameplay and story perspective, and whether or not I think it's worth your time. This is an unscripted, informal video, splitting the difference between a podcast and a video essay, and is more like a casual conversation with your buddy Greg than a definitive analysis of the crossover event. Before I get into my thoughts on the Another Eden Final Fantasy IX crossover, shameless YouTube plugs, please like, comment, subscribe, you know, all that good stuff. I did a video ranking all 11 Chrono games, and Another Eden was featured in that video, so definitely check that out after this one if you haven't seen that. Now, if you're wondering what the heck is Another Eden and what does it have to do with the Chrono games and what's this Final Fantasy IX crossover, allow me to give you a little bit of context. So Another Eden is a free RPG made by Masato Kato, and it's available on mobile and PC. Masato Kato is a legendary RPG developer. He is most famous for, well, he's famous for a lot of games, but he's mainly known as the guy who did Chrono Trigger, Radical Dreamers, and Chrono Cross. Those are his babies. He was one of the creative leads on Chrono Trigger, and he was the one who kept the franchise going with Radical Dreamers and Chrono Cross. He was also a major creative force in Final Fantasy VII, in Xenogears, and Final Fantasy XI. Now, anybody who knows me knows that those happen to be basically like a bunch of my favorite games. Basically, everything that Masato Kato has touched has been really, really great. With, you know, the possible exception of maybe like Radical Dreamers wanting a little bit more from that, and Chrono Cross being weaker than the others, but still a all-time great RPG. But like Final Fantasy VII, Chrono Trigger, like those, and Xenogears, like those are my top 3 favorite RPGs. And Kato worked on all of those. Like, he is the common denominator. So, for my specific taste, and also I'm a huge Final Fantasy XI fan, so for my specific taste, Kato is like the guy. And so, like I said, Another Eden is an RPG made by Masato Kato, available on mobile and PC. And it began as a spiritual successor to Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross, in the same way that Xenoblade is a spiritual successor to Xenogears and Xenosaga, where basically, I don't own the IP, but if you like these previous games, this is me continuing the story with legally distinct versions of these characters. But it's also heavily implied that certain characters in Another Eden are the same as their Chrono counterparts. It's been all but confirmed that the Luca that appears in the game and the Magus that appear in Another Eden are the same Luca and Magus from the Chrono series. Without going outright and explicitly stating it, they're the same characters, and they're written by the same guy. So Luca and Magus are in Another Eden as playable characters. And while Frog is not a playable character in Another Eden, there is a talking frog samurai named Cyrus who shares the name of Frog's best friend from Chrono Trigger, and is definitely a wink and a nod to that character. So that was the thing that hooked me into checking out Another Eden, was just loving Kato's games, really wanting a Chrono sequel, and hearing that there's all those Chrono Trigger references in there, and this is sort of like the lost Chrono Trigger sequel. But it also had really, really good reviews, and people said it was a free gacha game that did not play like a free gacha game. There's no stamina system, content isn't gatekept behind a paywall, the game is very free-to-play friendly. You get tons of free characters, and they're very powerful, so you could play the game with entirely free units and beat all of the main story. There's an insane amount of side content. Basically, Another Eden is a turn-based RPG that has a similar feel to the SNES era, but with a lot more room for dialogue, expansive storytelling, and a much, much, much bigger scope. The way I describe Another Eden is, imagine a SNES RPG with the size and scope of an MMORPG. And in terms of structure, the game is similar to both Final Fantasy XI and Final Fantasy XIV. It's sort of a hybrid of the two in terms of how it approaches story. So there is a base game with, like, you know, final boss, end credits, and everything, but there's also numerous expansions, similar to expansion packs in Final Fantasy XIV and Final Fantasy XI. And some of them need to be unlocked in a linear order, like Final Fantasy XIV's MSQ, but there are also a bunch of expansions that can be played in a non-linear order, like a lot of 11's expansions. And so because of this, there's a lot of freedom in the way that you can approach Another Eden, the order you can do the content in. And each expansion introduces new mechanics specific to that expansion. And not only that, the expansions don't just have like one main storyline, they have a bunch of side quests and side content within the expansion itself. And so each expansion is basically like its own little RPG. You're just carrying over stats and characters that you collected throughout your playing of Another Eden. But they tell self-contained stories with different characters, and like I said, they introduce new mechanics that are unique to that expansion. So Another Eden is not a just lazy gacha game where they're just like, oh, we're going to plop in new characters, new assets, and then just keep you stuck in the same gameplay loop, which is a common criticism of a lot of gacha games, that they look pretty, but the gameplay sucks. Another Eden is constantly switching up the gameplay to keep it interesting and engaging. And so the base game of Another Eden is your standard, like, 40-hour RPG, and each expansion is the length of an RPG. Some are on the short end of, like, 10 hours, but some expansions are as long as 60 hours. And there are over 40 different expansions for Another Eden. It is also a gacha game. It is a very generous gacha game. You get tons of free characters. I have, I think, almost 200 characters, and I've never had to pay for any of them. But like I said, it's a gacha with hundreds of characters, and each gacha character has character-specific side quests with lots of additional story and really giving you a feel for that character's personality. And those end up being about 2 hours in length, on average, for each of the gacha characters. Some of them have more, some of them have less, but basically each gacha character, you're going to have at least like 2 hours worth of like side content building them up as a character. And what's really great about that is that it really feels like Kato learning from Chrono Cross and doing Chrono Cross done right, where you still have the cast of thousands, but because you get the lengthy character side quests, the characters have a lot of personality. You really get to know them and appreciate them. And the gacha characters are often involved in different expansion storylines, so you get a lot more time to savor the characters than you did in Chrono Cross. So like almost like The Simpsons and how expansive the world is and all the different side characters, but, you know, with that RPG anime flavor to it. And the writing is generally pretty strong across the board. There are some weaker moments, but overall the standard of writing quality in Another Eden is very high. Like most of the time it's coasting like a solid like 7 or 8 out of 10. And then there are a couple of like the best moments in RPG storytelling in Another Eden. So it's just, like I said, really good standard of quality throughout. So an insane amount of content, really good overall, does not feel like a free game, feels like a paid-for game, and the only content that is gate-kept are the gacha character quests, because you don't get to do their character quests unless you get those characters in the gacha pools, but you get a bunch of free currency to pull characters from the gachas, and if you're worried about the strength of the characters, you get a bunch of really strong free characters, especially from doing crossover expansions called Symphonies. Symphonies, they incorporate mechanics from whatever game Another Eden is doing a crossover with, and they'll give you powerful free characters from those games, and will tell an original story with those characters and the Another Eden characters. So any crossover characters that in another gacha game you'd have to pull for, like, oh, I really want to get Surge from Chrono Cross, or Joker from Persona, I hope I draw them in the gacha pools. You don't have to worry about that. Another Eden gives you them for free, and they're really powerful and help carry you through a lot of the expansions. You get those characters, those Symphony crossover characters, just by playing through the Symphony expansion. So another thing about Another Eden is that, unlike most gachas, it doesn't remove content. Well, sort of. No content from Another Eden has been removed at all since its release, and all of the Symphonies are permanent expansions, except for the 3 Square Enix crossovers. Those are the only content in Another Eden that has a time limit before expiration. And after that time limit expires, they will be removed from the game, but thus far, none of them have been removed. And unlike most gacha crossovers, which are like, you know, a couple weeks, the Square Enix crossovers are 5 years. So the Octopath crossover and the Chrono Cross crossover were both contracted for 5 years, and neither have yet to expire. I think the Octopath crossover has like another 3 years, and the Chrono Cross crossover has another year left to play. And that Chrono Cross crossover was really great because Kato knows the characters from Chrono Cross inside and out, and that really fit in well to the story of Another Eden. Oh yeah, all the Symphonies are canon to Another Eden, so all these characters fit into the world of Another Eden. They make an effort to incorporate them into the storytelling. But like I said, the Square Enix crossovers have a time limit. 2 of them are for 5 years, but unusually, this new crossover, this Final Fantasy IX crossover, is only available for 6 months, and it's set to expire 1 day before the anniversary of Final Fantasy IX's release. So the crossover with Final Fantasy IX was announced on a live stream, and on the live stream, it was announced that Square would be making a special announcement the day after the event expires, aka on Final Fantasy IX's anniversary, and that Another Eden would be announcing a special quest as a follow-up to this expansion at that time as well. Now, this is just speculation, but I think that it'll be the Final Fantasy IX Remake announcement on Square's end. I think that this collab was supposed to tie into the Final Fantasy IX Remake hype, and was supposed to be promotion for Final Fantasy IX's Remake, but I think that the game got delayed due to development issues internally. My guess is that I think Square subcontracted the 9 Remake, and it wasn't up to the quality they wanted, and then they took it in-house, basically the exact same thing that happened with 7 Remake, and it's been causing delays. But because they already contracted with the Another Eden studio, Bright Flyer Studios, to do this promotion, and Another Eden had already finished, all their work on making the crossover event, and, all the paperwork was signed, and the development on Another Eden, on their end was done. The crossover was coming out. The paperwork is already signed. This is coming out either way. Because otherwise, the timing of this is really suspicious. The fact that it's only for 6 months, right before the anniversary. Square announced there'd be a special announcement. I would be surprised if the special announcement was just the Another Eden quest that they said they're going to add. But I don't think it's going to be just that, because Square said they were making an announcement separate from Another Eden on that day. So I think it's going to be a 9 Remake announcement. That is my guess. I'm not necessarily a 9 Remake truther, and also I love Final Fantasy IX. It's one of my favorites. I don't need a remake of it. I don't really care. But I do think it's important to analyze facts that are in front of you. So whether or not I'm invested in a Final Fantasy IX Remake coming out, I just have to look at all this information presented to me. Look at the fact that the last, when they did that Chrono Cross crossover, they ended up announcing the Radical Dreamers edition right around that time. And that was a cross tie-in promotion. So play Another Eden, get excited about Chrono Cross. By the way, Chrono Cross is available, ported, go buy it. And so it'd be very odd to randomly pick Final Fantasy IX of all games when there's nothing you're promoting special about Final Fantasy IX at the time. And with the NVIDIA leak and basically all of those games coming out except for the 9 Remake, I believe that Final Fantasy IX Remake was being developed, was having internal issues, and Square is no longer announcing games 5 years in advance of them coming out. They learned their lesson from that, and so they weren't going to make any press about the game until the game was close to being ready. But because of the leak, everyone kind of knows about it, and so it's still in that same limbo of games like Final Fantasy 15 and the like. Like I said, I'm not a 9 Remake truther. I don't need it to come out. I would be fine if it didn't come out. I have the original. I love it. I'm not one of those guys who's everything needs to be a remake. I'm more interested in new stories. But that said, I just gotta look at the facts in front of me. I think that 9 Remake is coming, and I think it was supposed to be ready now, got delayed, and the Another Eden crossover just came out at an awkward time. So in order to play the Final Fantasy IX Another Eden crossover, which is called Memories of Another Sky. So in order to play Memories of Another Sky, you need to get to Chapter 13 in the base game of Another Eden, and at that point, all of the symphonies are unlocked. So then you can play any of those expansions, because, as mentioned previously, all of the expansions in Another Eden are considered canon, and so you have to get far enough into the main story of Another Eden for the story of the expansion to make sense within Another Eden's world. Enough stuff has to happen in the MSQ of the base game in order for these to make narrative sense. So the basic things you need to know to understand the story of this expansion are just a couple characters and concepts from Another Eden. They don't go too heavy into Another Eden lore in this expansion, and it's really mainly focused on the Final Fantasy IX world and characters. But some things you'll need to know for just basic understanding. The main character of Another Eden is named Aldo. He is a time-traveling swordsman going across time and space to save the world and such. Your shonen anime RPG hero. Another prominent Another Eden character in this expansion is Cyrus, the talking frog samurai from the Middle Ages. Basically Frog from Chrono Trigger, but a samurai. And then Aldo has another companion, Amy, martial artist from the future that helps Aldo fight armies of androids called synth humans. And she is very similar to Tifa from Final Fantasy VII, but probably a bit more confident and less of an enabler. And so those are the important Another Eden characters you need to know to understand the story of this expansion. So the basic setup for Memories of Another Sky is Aldo, Amy, and Cyrus are investigating a faction of synth humans who are, basically doing terrorism and such in the future time era. And while investigating these synth humans, Aldo and Cyrus end up in a portal that takes them to the world of Final Fantasy IX, and they get separated from Amy, who tries to figure out a way to get to them and get them home. Aldo and Cyrus land in different places in the world of Final Fantasy IX, and Aldo ends up coming into contact with Zidane and his crew, and joins Tantalus, not knowing that they are intending to kidnap Princess Garnet. While Cyrus ends up meeting with Steiner and ends up joining the Alexandrian Knights. These are explained in flashback sequences, the lore of how the Another Eden characters got there. And so ordinarily when you play the crossover expansions, you start off with playing from the perspective of the Another Eden characters, and how they end up meeting the characters from different games, different worlds. And usually it's the characters from other games coming into the world of Another Eden, but this is the rare exception where the Another Eden characters are going into the world of someone else. They are in the world of Final Fantasy IX's Gaia. And so it actually starts off the same way that Final Fantasy IX does, where you are on the ship as Zidane, you light the candle, you play as Vivi, walk in the streets of Alexandria, you sneak into the play, you do a fake battle with the special effects, kidnap Princess Garnet, fight a bomb, and escape off on your airship. Like, it is very, very faithful to the beginning of Final Fantasy IX. But there are some differences. So, Senna apparently has a stomach ache, so Aldo takes his place. That's nothing, too surprising, because you have to incorporate the characters from the crossover. The bomb doesn't destroy the ship, and so they end up landing near the evil forest, but not in the evil forest, and you get a different area to explore after that. But then the party ends up, going through the ice cavern, fighting the Black Waltz, going to Dali, going underground, finding the Factory of the Black Mages, and it's very, very similar to Final Fantasy IX. There are some differences with the party dynamics because of Aldo and Cyrus being there, and the way they interact with the Nine cast. They bounce off each other a little bit differently, and those interactions are actually really, really engaging. Aldo acts as a really good mediator between Zidane and Steiner, and he really is the glue keeping the group together. And he really does usurp main character status from Zidane. And you would think that when you put a classic Final Fantasy character next to a character from a gacha game, you would think the gacha character would falter in comparison. But Aldo actually really holds his own as a great main character and a rock and foundation for this group throughout the expansion. And it doesn't feel like they were doing that just because they want to make their own character look good, but because of how the characters are written. It just feels like canon to how they would act in those given situations, and Aldo just naturally becomes the rock and foundation of the group. But like I said, for the most part, it's following the story of Final Fantasy IX very, very faithfully up to this point. There are some synth humans underground at the Black Mage factory, helping with the production of the Black Mages. And it's we're speeding things up because we're so much more technologically efficient. So synth humans have gotten into the world of Final Fantasy IX, but otherwise it's okay, we're pretty much just following the plot of Final Fantasy IX. There are some differences, Blank doesn't get turned to stone or whatever, but it's okay, we're doing an abridged version of 9, replaying the hits. And I was definitely enjoying it up to this point, but because I'd gotten so used to the Another Eden stories, telling original stories with the characters, it really felt okay, we're just doing a repeat of 9. I want something different. And so, because this is actually going to be something different, spoilers for the rest of this expansion, there'll be a time code to skip if you don't want to know what else happens in the story, but spoilers. So when the party first gets to Lindblum actually gets destroyed. So unlike in Final Fantasy IX, where you go to Lindblum and you get to explore the city and, do the festival, the hunt, and all that stuff, and then it gets destroyed by Eidolons far later in the game, that ends up happening on your first trip to Lindblum as you're arriving at the city. And so the in-world explanation for that is that with the help of the synth humans, Kuja was able to become much more powerful much more quickly, and they were able to initiate that attack on Lindblum much earlier than they would have otherwise. And so the best way to think about this Another Eden Final Fantasy IX crossover is that this is not canon to Final Fantasy IX, but this is a different timeline, and how the timeline would have shifted with the Final Fantasy IX characters meeting the Another Eden characters. How would that affect the Final Fantasy IX timeline? And so Dagger ends up going back to Alexandria to try to reason with her mother after the devastation upon Lindblum. But of course, Queen Braun decides, no, I'm just going to steal Dagger's Eidolons from her. And you go to Alexandria, try to rescue her. And what's really interesting is that Beatrix does not join your side in attempting to protect the princess like she does in the game. Instead, Steiner ends up having more resolve and fights against Beatrix in an attempt to rescue the princess. And so, because Beatrix hasn't had as much time to reflect upon the Queen's downfall as she did in Original 9, meanwhile, Steiner has been able to talk with Cyrus about what loyalty and honor means, and so he's been able to become more steadfast in his resolve much faster and make a transition to, doing what is honorable, not necessarily by the kingdom, but what is like the internal code of honor. And so it's interesting just to see like how things are shifting, the chess pieces are moving around just because of the influence of the Another Eden characters. So after we rescue Dagger, escape from the castle, we reunite with Amy, and we end up exploring the hideout of the synth humans. We meet with one of them named Royo, who seems to be a traitor in their midst and doesn't necessarily agree with their extreme tactics and kind of wants to help us out. And so Royo leads us to the Black Mage Village. And so we're going to the Black Mage Village much earlier. Like I said, everything's being told like in this weird, out of order way. But after the events in the Black Mage Village, we end up going to the Aoife tree. The events there unfold very similar to the way they do in Final Fantasy IX. And then the party goes back to Alexandria. Dagger becomes queen. Zidane enters the depression because he doesn't feel like he's needed and doesn't know where he fits into this new world with Dagger as queen and no longer as a traveling companion. So like I said, a lot of the beats are repeating. The attack on Alexandria happens after that. But instead of the You're Not Alone sequence we got in Final Fantasy IX, it basically, like Zidane's moping sequence is during this part, during the attack on Alexandria, where he doesn't feel like he's useful. And instead of having all of his friends snap him out of his depression, it's Aldo from Another Eden who has a heart-to-heart with Zidane and convinces him to step up and be the hero he needs to be. And so after the attack on Alexandria, the party discusses one of the main things that is holding them back from just taking out Kuja is that Kuja is allied with a leader of the synth humans who has a magical sword that Aldo is just not able to counteract. And so they come up with the idea of using the magic sword that Vivi does with Steiner and using that on Aldo's sword and seeing if they can find a way to counteract the synth humans' magic sword with Vivi's help. But they end up doing some investigating in the world of Another Eden and found that Vivi needs to learn the magic of the Another Eden world to counteract the sword that the leader of the synth humans is using. And so we go on a little quest to learn some magic in the world of Another Eden. Some endearing stuff definitely happens there, and it's nice to see how the Final Fantasy IX characters react to Another Eden's world. But then it's time to go stop Kuja and the leader of the synth humans in a big, giant final dungeon that is basically a combination of the Ark from Final Fantasy IX and the Synth Hydra, a time-traveling, robotic, sentient airship from Another Eden. And so those two are basically combined to like one super time travel airship fortress. And we defeat Kuja and the leader of the synth humans and save the day. Now that is a very, very brief overview of the story. There's a lot more stuff that happens in it. A lot of great character beats. Oh, and I forgot to mention this in the story section, but one thing that's really cool is that the character of Royo, so he is a synth human that is sort of rebelling against the other synth humans and is like not as much of an extremist as his allies. And so it turns out that he was actually a black mage from the world of Final Fantasy IX that ended up in the world of Another Eden, and his consciousness was transferred to a synth human. And so he has the memories of the black mage from that world, but he is ultimately not that same individual because that individual died and just his data and memories were copied over. And so it gets into like existentialism about who really wants to live forever. And so him being kind of like the characters from Lost Odyssey, where being immortal is like this tragedy, and then Kuja wanting his immortality. And so just they really do a good job exploring different existentialist themes. And so this isn't just like, oh, we're having the characters from 9, it's a jolly crossover. Like they do a good job of exploring the themes from the original game, but with a different angle to it. The cast of 9 really shines in this expansion. The main 4, Dagger, Zidane, Steiner, and Vivi, they're all really great in this expansion. But like I said, the Another Eden characters hold their own with the 9 characters, especially Aldo. And if I'm being honest, he kind of outshines Zidane in this expansion. And Zidane really feels more like a supporting character than a main character, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But it's interesting how with the introduction of Aldo, he really does shift into a more supporting role, like almost like a Locke in Final Fantasy VI. But even, I know some people argue like, oh, 6 has no main character and everybody's a main character. But like Locke wasn't actually the main character of 6. So he sort of falls into more like a Locke supporting role, or almost like maybe like a Yuffie, like I'm like the rogue. I'm not the main character. I'm an important character, but other characters move the plot more than I do. And other characters get more screen time than I do. So it's really interesting to see Zidane fall into the supporting character role. And actually, Vivi ends up being the character from 9 that gets the most screen time, and arguably is more of the main character of the expansion than Zidane is. If you had to pick a 9 character who's the main character of this expansion, it would actually be Vivi, not Zidane. But all of them, all those 4, they go through major arcs. Steiner's arc is actually probably a little bit more detailed than his arc is in Final Fantasy IX, as weird as that may seem. You see the better evolution of his thoughts on especially his thoughts on Zidane, than you do in 9. And that transition is more clearer and gradual, and it feels less abrupt. Like, you really see their relationship develop, I think, stronger here than in 9. And I think that Cyrus is a really great conversation partner with him, and those two bounce off each other really, really well. And so, like I said, it's an abridged version of 9, but there are some differences, and a lot of stuff was cut. There's no Aiko, Amaranth, Freya, and Hurt in My Soul, most of all, Kina. None of them are in this expansion. There's no redemption for Kuja. There is no death of Garland. Garland is in the expansion. He's off-screen. There's no Necron. We don't go to Terra. Zidane's origins are never revealed. He wonders about them. So, like, that's open-ended. Like, Zidane's arc isn't resolved, but it gives him a reason to keep on adventuring. But I would say story-wise, it was very well written, very satisfying. I wasn't feeling it as much until they started, like, really throwing in those curveballs, where I was enjoying it, but I was like, okay, this is just a nostalgia trip. I want something new. And like I said, that's why I'm not as into remakes. I like new stories. And what's great about this is that as the dominoes begin to fall and like the different changes like had that butterfly effect and kept changing things and getting bigger and bigger with the changes, it got really, really interesting. And what's great is that these characters felt faithful to the characters from 9. It didn't feel like fan fiction. It felt like these are the 9 characters. How would they have reacted if the circumstances were different? How would they have reacted in these different situations? How would these different variables change the course of their lives? And so you get to see them undertake different journeys than they would have gone on otherwise, but still getting the satisfaction of the journey they went on at 9. You get both, and that makes this a really enjoyable expansion. Okay, so now we're going to get into more technical stuff. So spoilers for the story are done. So what is this like from a gameplay experience? Like I said, Another Eden incorporates gameplay mechanics from whatever game they're doing a crossover with in the Symphonies. And so there are a lot of gameplay mechanics from 9 incorporated into Another Eden. The most significant is the active time events. So you get active time events, great extra scenes, great extra lore, those are great. But there's also Chocobo Hot and Cold, the friendly monsters who ask for ore, you run into them. Trance is a mechanic. The equipment upgrade system from 9 is a thing, and also they make the menus look like they did in Final Fantasy IX. That was a great touch. Mognet is a thing. Chocographs, those are also a thing. I did not actually get to any chocographs. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Upgrading your Chocobo to traverse more of the world map. The world map, that's also a thing. So the 9 world map is in the game. Their Ozma is an optional super boss. The synthesis mechanic from 9 is also in there. The Another Eden 9 characters have special abilities, very similar to their movesets in 9. And Zidane, Vivi, Dagger, and Steiner are all playable characters. You get them for free playing the game. You don't pull them in a gacha. You just unlock them forever through playing through the expansion. I actually uploaded the entirety of my gameplay footage onto this channel, so you can watch it if you're interested. Each Symphony expansion has a difficulty option, so you can decide how hard you want to make the battles in the expansion with a difficulty setter, based on how far you are in Another Eden. So if you're in the late game, you can play it like on an expert level difficulty to make the battles more challenging. But let's say you just start Another Eden, and you want to get the 9 characters, and you want to play the crossover before it's done, you just got to Chapter 13, you can set it to beginner and have an easier experience. And so they allow you to basically set the difficulty balance in yourself, based upon how far you are in Another Eden, so you don't necessarily have to be overpowered and one-shot everything if you're really far into it. But me, because I'm mainly playing for story, I actually played it on beginner, even though I've actually done basically every main story thing in Another Eden, beaten all the expansions. So I played it with my overpowered party to sort of plow through it, and also had equipment on that reduced random encounters. So I kind of plowed through this pretty fast. So that 10-hour video is me plowing through the story pretty fast. there are some like unedited breaks in the video. So like if my wife had to talk to me or I had to go to the bathroom, I just didn't edit that out of the video. So there might be some parts where I was hanging on one screen for a long time. But considering most of it was with like an overpowered party, reading the story pretty fast. Like I'm a fast reader. So reading the story pretty fast, overpowered party, reducing random encounters, and doing minimal side content. I did some of the Mognet stuff. I did some of Chocobo Hot and Cold, but I was making so little progress. I'm like, oh, this feels like way too much of a grind. I don't know if I want to do all this Chocobo Hot and Cold, at least not right now when I'm itching to play more Final Fantasy XIV. Like, especially when the reward for doing the Chocobo Hot and Cold is like, oh, I can fight Ozma. Like, I don't really want to fight Ozma. Ozma's a pain in the butt. Super bosses in Another Eden are hard. Like, they're great challenges if you're like a gameplay enthusiast. Man, the super bosses in Another Eden are a treat. But since I'm not a gameplay enthusiast, I'm mainly here for story. I'm like, I don't need to do it. I might do some more Chocobo Hot and Cold here and there before the event expires to see how far I can get, unlock more of the world map, you know, get all the Mognet letters sent if I can. But my goal was to just get this beaten by this week so I can make the vlog on it and then get back to playing 14 because I put off 14 for so many years and I really want to finish it. I want to get to the end of Dawn Trail and just feel victorious, you know, do the Rocky dance, all that stuff. But yeah, overall, this was a really solid expansion. I really liked it. The quality was very high throughout, like the gameplay, all the stuff they brought in from 9 was very faithful. And so we really are getting that Final Fantasy IX itch scratched, but with a new twist, and it doesn't feel half-assed. They put a lot of effort into this. This isn't your just like random gacha crossover, like, oh, we'll just stick some characters in and give you a couple cutscenes and call it a day. This is, like I said, it took me 10 hours, not really doing the side content, being overpowered, and reducing random encounters. So if you played this on like a difficulty that's balanced to wherever you're at in the game, this could easily take, you know, twice as long if you're reading at a slower speed, you know, not turning off random encounters, and also doing more of the side content, because there is still a lot of the side content that, like I said, I barely dip my toes into. You know, as far as issues with it, there are like a couple typos, like minor stuff like missed words, which that is a thing in Another Eden. There's not a lot of them, but because the game is so big, you will see them enough times just because there's just so much content. And I feel like the localization team, given how quickly Another Eden releases new content, how much of it there is, I just think they're on a crazy workload. And so like if you just miss the word "and" every now and then, I'm like, you know what, it's fine. And it's not too often. It does happen a couple times, like maybe 2 or 3 times in this expansion. But given how much dialogue there is, it's like, okay, am I going to remember the 2 or 3 times you forgot to put a word in? Or am I going to remember the, 10,000 times you had really great prose that really elevated the storytelling and captured the essence of everything perfectly? So I'm not going to be too hard on that. But I think overall, I really loved this expansion. I think that the best Another Eden expansion is still the Chrono Cross, in terms of the crossover expansions, is the Chrono Cross crossover. I think Kato understands those characters so well, and it fit into the main story of Another Eden so well, where it actually feels like a part of the story that it integrates into the main plot perfectly. Versus this really feels like its own thing that doesn't integrate into the Another Eden main plot. Like it doesn't take away from the main plot, but it doesn't feel like, oh, this is an essential piece of lore that is needed to make the rest of Another Eden make sense, where the Chrono Cross one kind of did. And I think that's why it worked as well as it did. Versus this one feels like a really great Final Fantasy IX parallel, time travel story. And it is really strong. If you're a fan of 9, I think this is absolutely worth your time. I think to get to this point in Another Eden, to get to Chapter 13 to play it, that's going to be like 10 hours of game time. So this is going to be a full RPG experience for you. If you play through Another Eden and then play through this expansion, that's going to be at least like 20 hours. Not doing side content. Add in side content, you're looking at a 30 to 40 hour RPG, but like I said, it plays like a SNES RPG, doesn't play like a gacha, no stamina system, nothing like that to worry about. And if you want to just, check it out for yourself without playing the game, just look at my footage and give it a look. See if it appeals to you. But that is the video. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to do the liking, the commenting, the subscribing, all that good stuff. Tell me, are you going to play this? Does it look interesting to you? And like I said, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and check out my weekly Final Fantasy XIV vlogs. I'll be back at it next week. Excited to jump back into 14. But also, I'm so glad I played this. I had a great time with it. Looking forward to chatting with you in the comments. Oh, and one final thing. Feel free to join my Discord server if you want to talk with me further. The one rule is basically, like, don't be a jerk. That's, like, the main rule. And then, like, try to keep it PG-13. Like, don't post non-safe for work stuff just in case somebody's at work. But, like, swearing's fine. We're pretty chill about swearing. But yeah, if you want to come hang out and chat with me, feel free to join the Discord. Alright, that's the video. I'll see you guys next week for a Final Fantasy XIV vlog. Bye, everyone.